All right, welcome back to our very first Breaking It Down. We'll take this portion of the show each day to try to really get into more detail about something that we think might benefit from a little further explanation. And we're going to start today our inaugural version with the case against our Treasury Secretary, Tim Geithner. As we all sit here today, this afternoon in January, Wall Street continues to exploit a policy of government-sponsored giveaways and secrecy in order to continue to pay themselves billions by harvesting your hard-earned tax money for their future enrichment. It's like harvesting trees back in the old days, except for now you just harvest people's money. Record-setting bonuses, in fact, due to banks like Goldman Sachs as early as next week. Yet instead of acting as our cop, Secretary of the Treasury Tim Geithner has become central to what may be a cover-up of the greatest theft in U.S. history. Here's the evidence. Count number one, the AIG emails. Recently released emails, of course, show Geithner's New York Federal Reserve Bank directing AIG to keep details of the 100 cents on the dollar bailout secret. A reversal, I would say, of the traditional role of government, which is to force companies to become more transparent so that shareholders and others can see what they're doing, not less transparent. A Treasury spokeswoman says Geithner wasn't involved. Secretary Geithner played no role in these decisions, and indeed, by November 24th, they say, he was recused from working on issues involving specific companies, including AIG. Friday, the White House defended the Treasury Secretary.
These decisions did not raise to his level at the Fed.
How do you know that he wasn't involved? He was a leader of the New York Fed. So.
Right, but he wasn't on the emails that have been talked about and wasn't party to the decision that was being made.
So he was not party to a decision to hide $62 billion in payouts of U.S. taxpayer money to firms that had become insolvent during Tim Geithner's 5-year watch running the New York Federal Reserve? Congressman Darrell Issa speculates that maybe Geithner wasn't on the emails in question because his people felt so strongly that they already knew their boss's intentions, they didn't feel the need to bother with the details. Count number two. Geithner said during confirmation hearings in March that he wasn't even a regulator.
I've never been a regulator. Not a regulator nor a lawyer, unfortunately, so I'm not sure I can give you an adequate answer to that, but I'd be happy to think about it a little bit and get back to you with a view on...
Well, I don't think it's complicated to think about the principle of innocent until proven guilty. How about the IRS? Can't you advise the IRS and say, don't assume anything until you prove these guys did something wrong before we prosecute them and say that they owe $500,000? I mean...
All right. According to the New York Federal Reserve's website, regulation, in fact, is the job of the man who collects a salary, a taxpayer-funded salary, running the New York Federal Reserve. And I quote, I went to the website earlier today just to make sure I hadn't gotten drunk at lunch, and it says, as part of our core mission, this is the New York Federal Reserve, we supervise and regulate financial institutions in the 2nd District. The 2nd District, of course, is the epicenter for the bailed-out banks and the billion-dollar bonuses that they are on schedule to pay out once again as early as next week. Count number three, what one blogger dubbed the Christmas Eve taxpayer massacre. As you and I were wrapping those last-minute presents, Geithner's Treasury Department wrapped the biggest present of them all, lifting the $400 billion cap on taxpayer responsibility for potential losses for Fannie and Freddie. The new cap, unlimited, infinite taxpayer funds. Interesting timing, wouldn't you say? Christmas Eve, Tim? Really? Still no word on recovering the hundreds of millions paid to the CEOs who created the toxic mess we now call Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Count number four. Geithner's too cozy with certain banks. Remember those call logs when he first started? 80 contacts with Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Citigroup in just 7 months' time. You'll notice, particularly Goldman and JP Morgan, basically have total monopolies on their markets and are wealthier than they've ever been. Meanwhile, Bank of America's CEO only received 3 calls. Apparently, B of A, not one of Geithner's favorites. You can see why when you consider that there are still many unanswered questions about Tim Geithner's role and threatening to fire Bank of America management if they didn't go through with a deal to buy the ever-increasingly more toxic Merrill Lynch. Kind of jammed it in there and told them to shut up. Finally, count number 5, TARP investigator Neil Barofsky's report that says Geithner's New York Fed overpaid the big banks through AIG by billions of dollars. Geithner says it had to be done. Maybe so. Then again, maybe not. But that takes us to our penultimate point. Our ultimate need is, since the Treasury Secretary has yet to prove whose side he's really on, the Wall Street bigwigs who exploit our government to enrich themselves, or the American taxpayer who, by law, is forced to send vast fortunes to Washington, D.C., only to watch that money to be abused. Here's a litmus test for Mr. Geithner. Either show us the past 10 years of AIG emails between AIG, the New York Federal Reserve, and Goldman Sachs, or step down so that we can get somebody in there who will show them to us. A crime has been committed against America and its taxpayers. And right now you, sir, Tim Geithner, are standing at the door of the crime scene, refusing to allow anybody in to even see the evidence. Show us you're not involved, Mr. Geithner. Prove the White House correct in defending you. All we're asking for is the transparency promised by the president you serve.